All right, the sermon has gone live again on Facebook. This is the sermon from last weekend. For those of you who had noticed, who had tried watching it before, it disconnected at about 13, 14 minutes in, but there was some confusion on really what happened there. So instead of trying to salvage that, I wanted to go back and I wanted to redo this message. I don't want this message to just come off as, oh, well, you got part of it, that's all you need. No, this message it's a hard message to prepare for. It's a hard message to deliver. Romans is a really tough book, and I don't take Romans lightly at all. In fact, last week when we talked about how God's righteousness, how it shines through His people, and how God's righteousness is a theme throughout the entire book of Romans itself. But now we come to this section in the second part of chapter 1, and we talk about something we necessarily don't like talking about. And that thing we don't usually like talking about is God's wrath. Now, I know we don't like this topic of discussion. Why don't we like this topic of discussion? It's not one of those feel-good messages. It's not one of those messages that a preacher delivers, or that you sit down in a pew and listen to, or listen online and you're energized by it, or you feel good about yourselves. I feel like often on Sunday mornings we feel this need to come to church and feel as if we need re-energized, or feel as if we need a motivational speaker. I know oftentimes preachers are seen as just motivational speakers to get me through a week. This is not one of those messages. And in fact, if you had a bulletin, the bulletin would have a top 5 or a countdown of 5 things on the back of it where we keep notes. And the question this week is, why is sin so prevalent? Why is sin so prevalent? And that's the question we're going to try and tackle today. Now, if we look at our culture, we can kind of see that sin has been rampant. Like, we can see sin everywhere we go. It's glorified in culture today. But however, when Paul wrote this nearly 2,000 years ago, sin was also rampant. Paul wrote this to the church in Rome roughly 2,000 years ago with the same problems that we're still dealing with today. And so as we go through this, we're going to go through it a lot like we went through last week, and this week you'll actually get to see the slideshow, which will help out a little bit more. But we'll read through the 13, 14 chapters here, or verses here, and then we'll go back through it and we'll break it down. We'll break it down much like we broke it down with the highlighting. So we're going to study this passage the same way that I've grown to study different passages. And so likewise, you'll be seeing this more from my point of view and how I break this down, and through what I've read and learned through this, you'll be learning it almost the same way that I do. And so as we get into this, not only are we going to break it down in the way that I usually do, in preparing for this, I saw that actually breaking it down in reverse order actually proved to be more advantageous. It proved to be better in studying than it did reading it from front to back, reading it from back to front. I had a college professor tell me that in order to best communicate your message, in order to best perceive your audience, that message that you want, you have to know the material front to back and back to front. And so that's a little bit of what we're going to do here this afternoon in reliving this message from last Sunday, August 1st. And then we'll go into chapter 2 on August 8th, coming up here in a couple days. So I hope you join us in person for that, because then we can avoid some of these technical issues here. So as we start here, I'll read through, and then we'll go back and we will break some things down. For God's wrath is revealed from heaven against all godlessness and unrighteousness of people who, by their unrighteousness, suppress the truth, since what can be known about God is evident among them, because God has shown it to them. For his invisible attributes, that is, his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly seen since the creation of the world, being understood through what he has made. As a result, people are without excuse. For though they knew God, they did not glorify him as God or show gratitude. Instead, their thinking became worthless, and their senseless hearts were darkened. Claiming to be wise, they became fools and exchanged the glory of the mortal God for images resembling mortal man, birds, four-footed animals, and reptiles. Therefore, God delivered them over in the desires of their heart to sexual impurity, so that their bodies were degraded among themselves. They exchanged the truth of God for a lie and worshipped and served what has been created instead of the Creator, who is praised forever. Amen. For this reason, God delivered them over to the disgraceful passions. Their women exchanged natural sexual relations for unnatural ones. The men, in the same way, also left natural relations with women and were inflamed in their lust for one another. Men committed shameless acts with men and received their own persons the appropriate penalty of their error. And because they did not think it worthwhile to acknowledge God, God delivered them over to a corrupt mind, so that when they do what is not right, they are filled with all unrighteousness, evil, greed, and wickedness. They are full of envy, murder, quarrels, deceit, and malice. They are gossips, slanderers, God-haters, arrogant, proud, boastful, inventors of evil, disobedient to parents, senseless, untrustworthy, unloving, unmerciful, although they know God's sentence, that those who practice such things deserve to die. They not only do them, but even applaud others who practice them. And so that brings us back around to the very beginning here. And as we look through this, it points out who are these people that we're talking about? Who is God's wrath coming down upon? Who is God judging at this current moment? Why has evil become so prevalent within our lives? And as we go through this, we'll start at 5, and then as we work our way down to number 1, number 1 is kind of the overarching theme of all of these. And so as we work through this, I want you to look at why evil is so prevalent. And our first one comes from this here. Those who practice such things, you can see such things here is a little darkened than the rest of the sentence. And those such things are those unrighteousness, that wickedness, that evilness, that sin, that those who practice sin deserve to die. And so that's what such things are. And we'll get into a little bit further a list of those things. But this isn't just a one-person thing. Those people deserve to die. But here we have people who even applaud others who practice them. And that brings us to our first point. People celebrate evil. People celebrate evil. One of these sermons that I was listening to in preparation for this series, for this sermon here specifically, was from a man who did a simple Google search. He searched the term pure evil. And in searching that term, some of the things that popped up were an apparel company, a clothing line, if you will. Another was a record label. Another one was an album. Another one was a song. Another one was whatever you can think of. Popular culture today, or pop culture, the secular world, has decided that they're going to celebrate evil. And evil here, people celebrate it. And that brings us to our first point. Evil is celebrated. And so that's why sin is prevalent in today's culture. If we read through here, if we look at who these people are, who is the unrighteous, who are the wicked, who are the sinners, who are the ones that God deems worthy to die. Here we see in verse 29, we see 3 times they are filled with all unrighteousness. They are full of envy. They are gossips. And then we even go to verse 32 again. Although they know God's sentence, they not only do them, but even applaud others who practice them. We see they. And we have to understand who they are. And like I said, we have this list of sins that Paul points out to us here. They are filled with what? All unrighteousness. They are filled with evil, greed, wickedness. They are envious, murderous, quarrels, or fighting. They seek fights, deceit, malice. They're gossipers, they're slanderers, they're God-haters, they're arrogant, they're proud, they're boastful, they invent evil, disobedient to parents. Let's zoom in on that. Disobedient to parents. This it doesn't just indicate us as adults. This just doesn't mean that mature Christians are those who sin. This indicates that our children as well are indicated in this sentence of death. That even the children, that they're senseless, they're untrustworthy, they're unloving, they're unmerciful. Now, if we look back through all of this list, I know among us there aren't many murderers. There aren't many people who look to fight over and over again. At least I hope not. I don't think there are. I don't believe there are. But yet, where else do you fall on this? Are you a gossiper? Are you arrogant? Are you a little bit too prideful? Are you boastful? Do you speak of the actions that you do? Are you disobedient to your parents? Those of you who are younger and following along here. Are you senseless? Do you take unnecessary risks? Are you untrustworthy? Do you do the things that you say you're going to do? That goes into untrustworthy. Are you unloving? Are you unmerciful? Has what happened to you in the past caused you to grow callous? Because quickly, when we go back to the theys that are highlighted in blue here, the theys quickly become we. Us, me, I. So if we read that, if we change this around and we read it again, let's go ahead and do that now. I am filled with all unrighteousness, evil, greed, and wickedness. I am full of envy, murder, quarrels, deceit, and malice. I am a gossiper, I'm a slanderer, I'm a God-hater, I'm arrogant, I'm proud, I'm boastful, I'm an inventor of evil. I'm disobedient to parents. I am senseless, untrustworthy, unloving, and unmerciful. The theys quickly turn to me and I, or us and we. No longer is it those people outside these walls who are the sinners, who are the wicked, who are the evil. It quickly becomes the church itself, the people within these walls that become the wicked and the evil and the unrighteous. Now, don't get me wrong, a church is for all people. Church is especially for those people. If you go to a doctor's office, it's not because you're in great health, it's because you are sick. You walk through these doors on a Sunday morning, on a Wednesday evening, any day throughout the week, it's not because you are spiritually sound. It's because you are seeking, you are lost, or you are hurt. That is why we come to church. As we talked about last week when Paul mentioned he wishes to come to Rome for mutual encouragement. That is why Paul wrote this letter and why Paul wished to be with the church in Rome. That brings us to our fourth thing. People do evil things. People do evil things. It's not just the people outside this world or outside this building. It's not the people in the secular realm. It's not people who aren't Christians. It's all of us. People do evil things. And that brings us to our next question. If people do evil things, if popular culture has deemed sin or sin culture or evilness within culture, if they have deemed that, if they have glorified that, and then in return they do these things, people do evil things, we have to look at why. Why do people do these evil things? And lucky for us, Paul actually breaks this down for us pretty well. And because they did not think it worthwhile to acknowledge God. They did not think it worthwhile to acknowledge God. And so remember, they turns into we, the Israelites, the young Christians, the early church, the first church. Many historical figures throughout the Bible, me, myself, you, yourself, all of us who consider ourselves Christians fall into this picture. They did not think it worthwhile to acknowledge God, and so something happened here. And so God delivered them over to a corrupt mind so that they do not do what is right. So that they do not do what is right. So that they do what is not right. So wait, what happens here? Let's see. Because they did not think it worthwhile to acknowledge God, God delivered them over to a corrupt mind so that they do what is not right. Simply put, people's minds are corrupted. People's minds are corrupted. You see, God in the very beginning in the Garden of Eden had a very specific plan for us. He knew that plan would fail because he gave us free will. And that's one of the things that we have that ruin us, that add sin into our lives. And so if we ask ourselves, people's minds are corrupted, people do evil things, evil is praised, but why? The first thing we have to look at here, number one, is if there was no evil, if bad things didn't happen, if, that quote, why do bad things happen to good people? Well, one, there is no such thing as simply good people. There is in all of us some kind of evil desire, some kind of deceit, some kind of selfish ambition behind everything that everyone does. But if there was no evil, if there was no bad, there would be no God. Or let me phrase it a little bit better, there would be no need for God. There would be no need for God. And to go even a step further, if there was no evil, if there was no bad, then there would be no falling away, no needing God, no needing to follow God. And so then the sacrifice of Jesus wouldn't be needed as well. There would be no need for Jesus as we know the gospel story. If everything was perfect as it should have been in the Garden of Eden, then there would be no need for this thing we call religion. Number two, I mentioned it before, free will. We choose evil. We choose to do evil things. I said it before, everyone does evil, but we choose it. We choose to do these things. Because humanity feels like we don't need God, we can become our own gods. We've read throughout Scripture that God gives us what we desire most. And so what do we desire most? What is it that you want most of all deep down inside? Is it more money? Is it security? Is it comfort? Is it anything you can think of? What do you desire most? Because God will eventually give it to you if you ask him enough earnestly. Both good and bad things. We can look throughout the Bible and see that this is true. If we look at the story of the Israelites, what did the Israelites want? They wanted to follow their own way instead of following God's way, and so God made them wander around a desert for 40 years. Another time, Moses is up on the mountain receiving the 10 Commandments from God, and while Moses is up there, the people grow restless. They think Moses is taking too long, and so they erect a golden calf, and they begin to worship this golden calf. They chose this golden calf over choosing God. If we look at the story of David, David chose his lust, his physical needs over choosing God, and eventually that led to a child being born out of wedlock and an innocent man being murdered. Not by David's hand, but murdered nonetheless. We can go back to the Israelites, and the Israelites wanted what the rest of the nations around them had. They wanted a powerful physical manifestation of a king. They wanted a king to show that they were a real nation like the other nations. Despite having the King of Kings and the creator of all things, they decided that they no longer needed God. And so God gave them a king. God gave them Saul, which would eventually lead to David. And then after David, you have Solomon. And then after Solomon, you have a long line of human kings that were proved again and again to fall into evilness, to fall into wickedness, to fall into unrighteousness because of what they desired. And so once again, we see that people's minds are corrupted because of what we desire. People's minds are corrupted because of what we desire. In verse 24 here it says, "Therefore God delivered them over in the desires of their own hearts to sexual impurity, so that their bodies were degraded among themselves. They exchanged the truth of God for a lie." They exchanged the truth of God for a lie and worshipped and served what has been created instead of the Creator who is praised forever. They exchanged the truth of God for a lie and worshipped and served what has been created instead of the Creator. That's a pretty powerful indictment there. They exchanged the truth of God for a lie. They chose not God, not what granted them peace, not what granted them everything that they had, not what blessed them with all the abundance that they needed. They chose to worship what they wanted, choose to worship what they thought they needed. They worshiped the things that were created instead of the Creator Himself. That's a pretty powerful statement. But if we look at all of these things, if we look here to people celebrate evil, and then because of that, people celebrating evil, people then do evil. And because people do evil, because people's minds are corrupted. People's minds are corrupted, and so then they do evil, so then those who do evil apply to others who do evil. And you can see this chain reaction appearing throughout all of mankind. And God's response here comes up in these next couple verses here. And so if we look, what can be known about God is evident among them because God has shown it to them. What can be known about God is evident to us because God has shown it to us. We see His eternal power and divine nature through what He has made. We see His eternal power and divine nature through what He has made. Throughout His creation, we see evidence of God. We look outside, we feel the breeze, we see a bird flying, we see a little tiny hummingbird. We go to the beach, we see the ocean, we see the waves crash upon the shore. And some people out there break this down to an explosion at the beginning of history. That an explosion perfectly caused everything you see around you. Now I use this illustration here on Sunday, but we look at this book, we look at this Bible here that's in front of me, and there's letters and there's words, and these words make sentences, and these sentences make paragraphs, and these paragraphs make chapters, and these chapters form into huge long books that convey a message. But someone had to make these letters. Someone had to put these letters together. Someone had to make these sentences and put these sentences together. Someone had to do all of this work in order to get this book to where it was at. And yet when you look at the basis of humanity, when you look at the basis genome of what a person is, it can be broken down into DNA. Deoxynucleic acid, however you pronounce it, whatever it is, DNA is the very essence of each person. And if you look at the base of DNA, it is 4 letters. Now it's a little bit more complicated than just those 4 letters, but it is those 4 letters that come together in those pairs that makes each and every one of us unique. The earth is at the very specific point away from the sun that is perfect for human habitation. If the sun was any closer to us, if earth was any closer to the sun, we would all burn to death. If the earth was any further away from the sun, we would all freeze to death. Life wouldn't be possible unless earth was perfectly where it is right in this moment. And yet, for some reason, people chalk that up to an explosion, a big bang that happened centuries, thousands and thousands of years ago. I can't wrap my mind around the perfection of nature, the perfection of humanity, everything needed to create wind, everything needed to create an earthquake, everything created to need a fire, everything created to create a baby, a living human being. And yet this is what we choose to see as random events. One of the podcasts I was listening to this week in preparation of this, the guy there did a little survey. I can't remember the year of this survey. I can't remember the exact numbers of the survey, but in a roundabout way, 40% of people in this survey said that they believe there is a creator, believe that there is a God, and worship that God. 40%. So 40% of these Americans that were surveyed believe that there is a God and follow that God and understand that God is the creator of all things. Now, another 20% of this survey said that there is a creator. So another 20% say there is a creator, but they don't follow him for whatever reason that may be. Maybe they're atheists or agnostics or whatever, but they don't follow a creator, but they know there is one. On top of that, another 15% in this study say that there must be some kind of divine creator, whether that's God or it's not God, whether it's some other thing. There is a creator out there. That's what another 15% of these people say. And so if we add all of this together, a rough 85% of the people surveyed believe in a divine creator, whether they follow him or not. 85% believe in a creator. I think that should say a lot to us. I think that should say a lot to us, that God judges us. And if we look here at our next point, the screen's a little bit high, and so I'll come over here and I'll lower this, because this part is extremely important here. Through what he has made. Because of this fact that we all see God in nature, we see God's divine power or divine nature and eternal power through what he has made. And because of that, we have no excuse. We have no excuse for us being evil because we see the evidence of God. And so because of that, people are then judged by God. We're going to come to an end time in life, and it's going to come down to the point where we get to the gates of heaven, and we have to answer the question, what was it all for? We have to stand in front of Peter, and we have to stand in front of Jesus, and we have to answer the question, what did you do for me? And was it for me, or was it for you? One of these days, we'll have to answer that very question. We know deep down sin is so prevalent. We know the answer, and we know why God's wrath has been revealed. We know why the wrath is coming, because we have suppressed the truth. And as we move forward, we'll get to our number one reason here. For God's wrath is revealed from heaven. God's wrath will reign in the end times. In our end times, in the end times, in the apocalypse times, God's wrath will be revealed against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of people. Against all godlessness and unrighteousness. Against all people who are unrighteous, against all people who are wicked, against all people who are evil, including us, God's wrath will prevail. God's wrath will come. And we'll have to answer for that. But why? We always ask that question, why? And God's wrath is coming because who, by their unrighteousness, suppress the truth? Because the truth has been suppressed. That is why God's wrath is coming. For they knew God, they did not glorify him as God or show gratitude. They exchanged the truth of God for a lie and worshipped and served what has been created instead of the Creator, who is praised forever. And because they did not think it worthwhile to acknowledge God, God delivered them over to a corrupt mind. People are evil. People are wicked. The secular world, the Christian world, and it's not because prayer isn't in schools. It's not because the Bible isn't in schools. It's not because of any of that. It's because of the earliest people choosing with their free will to do evil. Evil continues to happen because people continue to choose evil over God. To simply put it, people reject God because we have suppressed the truth, because we know God and we still choose to ignore him, because we exchange truth for lies we tell ourselves, and simply put, because we have replaced God. That's what it all boils down to. That's what all of this boils down to. Why is evil celebrated? Why do people do evil things? Why are people's minds so corrupted? Why is homosexuality so prevalent? Why is transgender so prevalent in today's cultures? Why is all of this sin? Why is lust? Why is sex before marriage? Why is living together before marriage? Why is it all just shrugged off? Because we've accepted it. This isn't what God's original intent was, but because of what we truly desire, our minds have been corrupted. Sin has entered the world and forever changed our perspective on things. And sad to say, but true, we will never get any of that back. Our minds will never be uncorrupted until this world is no more. Until sin is no more, because we've all received the salvation that Jesus provides. And that's what this comes down to. We have to stop replacing God. We have to stop replacing our wants with God's wants. Or we have to stop replacing God's wants with our wants. We have to simply believe God, follow God, accept what God tells us through Scripture, and believe in Jesus. Because that's the only way we can get back all that we've lost through sin, through evil, is we have to go back to following Jesus, believing in Jesus, accepting the sacrifice that Jesus made for us and our sin and our wickedness and our depraved mind.